Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Great. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. This 2-week gap thing is crazy. I don't know why we don't do one of these shows every single day.
Well, if that's the road you want to go down, you know I'll be your wingman. But I'm surprised that you said that out loud.
Yeah, I'm rethinking it all right now when I think of how much effort goes into every episode. Okay, you know what?
Yeah.
Let's just keep it to once every 2 weeks. That's probably.
I think that would be best.
Yeah, I think it'd be very best. This is we're in season 5, episode 7. Listening to The Linking Rings. We'll be listening to chapter 7 today. Last time we listened to chapter 6 with Stan Allen, which was a delight. Boy, I like Stan Allen. He's been so nice to me over the years.
There's not a guest that we've had that I have not liked.
Oh, there's one. There was one. No, that's not true. Not at all. No, there hasn't been one because they don't, the system is set up that if they're going to be, not nice in the asking, then they're just not going to come on. There isn't anyone I wouldn't like to have back on. But today we have somebody who's on for the first time who is a delight. She's so funny and so talented, and she comes from a lineage of talented parents. She is Sara Ballantine. Her father was the great Carl Ballantine, who we both
Did you
knew.
say his name and I smile?
Yeah, that's exactly it. You say his name and you smile. You remember him from just about every show in the 70s, although as Sarah points out, I think her mother was in more shows than Carl was, but then also his hysterical magic act, which came out of a magic act going wrong, and he found that he got more mileage out of that. She was so much fun to talk to. Over the years, there are some rules that you stick with, and there are some rules that you can break. And when we started chatting with Sarah, I right away felt I needed to break a rule. I'm going to begin by saying I'm about to break a rule that I learned from the writer Richard Osman, who wrote the Thursday Murder Club series, in which he said, when you meet someone for the first time, never ever comment on the most obvious thing about them because they've heard it 60,000 times. And in his case, it's because he's like 6'8", and he said, I don't need people telling me that I'm tall. But I'm going to break that rule and say I have never met anyone named Saratoga, and that is the coolest name in the world.
Thank you.
I'm guessing it's related to the racetrack?
Correct. That was my father's passion besides magic. He loved the horse races, and apparently I was conceived there. I don't
Not
know.
at the track, I hope, but in
Well,
Saratoga, New York.
Yeah, I don't know. But that was his favorite track. It was the prettiest track he knew. I was named Saratoga. My sister Molly was born here in Los Angeles, but there was a track called Caliente when we moved here. That was in Tijuana. He named her Caliente after that track. And then that track burned down, so they went with Molly.
I actually grew up on Saratoga, believe it
Oh,
or
you
not.
did?
Yeah,
Really?
the street here in St. Paul called Saratoga, named after the famous Revolutionary War battle.
Right,
And
right.
so,
Yeah, Saratoga has a lot of different connotations. So,
yes, indeed.
yes. And
Indeed.
most people call me Sarah anyway, just so you know. I mean, what are you gonna
Anybody
do?
call you Toga?
Yes, a few people call me Toga. Yes, which is always makes me laugh, Yeah, it's cute.
At this point, I will cut in the sound from Animal House as I'm yelling,
Toga, 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 toga.
I have a friend on his voicemail, if you call him and he knows it's me, it's that part of Guys and Dolls. And you get off at Saratoga for the 14th time.
It's good to have friends. It's really good to have friends.
Oh,
Yeah.
gosh, yes.
Yeah,
What would
but-
we do without them?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yes. So we're going to talk about a number of things today. First, I want to talk about your father. And I will say, and I think Jim will back me up on this, there's some performers out there in the world who the moment you just see their face, you smile. Because you're in really, really, really good hands.
Right.
And growing up, I knew your father first from McHale's Navy.
Now that game over, let's trade for trinkets.
Really? You're in luck.
How would you like us to pay for those trinkets in cash? American wampum. Genuine U.S. money.
No place to spend money on island?
So what? Look at these pictures. Lincoln, Jefferson, Grant. All heap big American chiefs. You'd be the only one on the island with his own private art collection.
But then on virtually every sitcom TV show happening in the 70s and 80s, but then also as Ballantine the magician.
First, the simple tricks, then I move into the more difficult tricks, and I pack up all this stuff and head to Camden. The magician, that's what the old black rag says, the magician cuts the piece of rope in half. 2 pieces. Ah, this kid's dynamite. Where do they find this kind of talent on a Sunday evening? In the alley, that's where. A few passes over the backfield. Simple trick of sticking the 2 hunks of rope back together again. Keep your eyes on the 2 hunks of rope. You know a better way? There, but they're sober. There it is, cleverly done. Together. Whoops, wrong rope. Always when I want to do good for my probation officer. Okay, who played around with the stuff back there?
So let's just dig into that for a little bit, because I know that he popped up on a lot of variety shows in that role. What were his early days in magic like? Because he didn't start out in comedy magic, right?
It started out in real magic. Well, the way I heard it, or the way I have processed it, when he was a little boy, there used to be a barber that came to their house in Chicago to cut his hair and the rest of the family's hair. And my dad didn't like sitting still. So to keep my dad entertained, the barber started doing some card tricks and some thimble tricks to keep him in the chair and keep him occupied. And my dad got interested in it that way. And then the night before he was to be bar mitzvahed, his father died. And so he was never bar mitzvahed. The family sat Shiva for a year. Dad never pursued Judaism after that. And he had to support the family. He was the man of the house. So he started performing little magic shows and doing little gigs as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he turned 18, 19, he started working nightclubs, doing a straight manipulation act with cards and I don't know what all, but I know he did a lot of cards because he always had cards in his hand, even at 90 he did. And then one night he was doing a gig and the trick screwed up and the audience laughed. My dad made a joke and the audience laughed more. And the club owner said, that was pretty funny what you did up there. Maybe you should start thinking about getting more magic in the act. More comedy in the act. And my dad took it to heart and started developing slowly his act, which,
Mm-hmm.
as far as I know, he was one of the first magicians to really come out in the tux and the tails and appear to have all of the trappings of a straight magician and then completely would futz with the form. But he really knew how to do it, so that's why it was funny. Because people have said to me, Sarah, you should do your father's act. I'm like, no, because it wouldn't be as funny because he really knew magic. I would just be an actress acting like my father. So anywho, that's the story as I know it. I believe it's true. And then the comedy became more and more and more what he went into. And it was always with good timing. He always had great delivery. Anyway, that's the story as I know it.
I like all of that.
We will have clips in the show notes. There's a few things on YouTube of him doing his act, and it's interesting to see it over what appears to be, at least on YouTube, maybe even a 30-year span or more, where you really see him in his probably 50s again, and then him in his 80s doing it.
So much energy. He has a
And
lot of energy.
The moment he walks on stage, and Jim, you'll understand this because you do a lot of stage work. There
Are
are
you an actor,
performers.
Jim?
I
Are you
am.
an- Okay.
Actor's a strong word for what I do, but yes.
Okay.
But there are performers who walk on stage who just suddenly fill the room with energy.
Yes.
And Jim and I did a lot of corporate work together because I was producing meetings and events, and he was often our MC. And having the ability, particularly after an executive has sucked all the energy out of the room, to come on and bring that all back is a rare gift. And your father had it in spades.
Oh,
And
boy.
seeing the span of him doing that act and saying the lines every time as if for the first time.
It was
Uh,
like an actor has to in a long run on Broadway or a long run anywhere. He caught the tail end of vaudeville, like the tail end of it, and then the early days of television.
Mhm.
So he was one of the early magicians to get on those variety shows. The Milton Berle and Danny Kaye, and there were a bunch of variety shows in the late 40s, I guess. I know he that's when he really started getting visual. And then Ed Sullivan found him, and then he did about 7 episodes, different episodes. Apparently Ed Sullivan never got it, didn't understand why the audience was laughing, didn't get the act, didn't know why people liked him, but he brought him back because he was a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
That's so
You can have a lot of different qualities in this business, and even if you don't understand what's funny, if you know that it's successful, that's enough.
That's right. Isn't
Ed
that
was at least
cool?
smart enough to realize, this
That's
guy's
right.
it's working. Why would
That's
I,
right.
even if I don't get it, it's people are loving it. Your dad really had just a tremendous career in the entertainment industry. You mentioned tail end of vaudeville. We, of course, know him from McHale's Navy, and as John mentioned, just about every television show in the 60s and 70s.
That's true. He guest starred on everything, and
You really
he was
did.
so different in everything. I mean, he was really always himself. I take
Mhm.
that back. But I recently saw him in an episode of like Bonanza or Gunsmoke, where he's in the bolo tie and the hat, and but he's still kind of a hustler character. Just so funny to see that, and to make it about me, of course. I should have gone on the set more with him on these, when he did Speedway with Elvis Presley and Penelope with Natalie Wood and the Monkees. And, people said, "Oh, did you get to meet Elvis?" And I'd be like, "Well, no, I had my ballet lesson that day," or, "I was in school." Uh, it didn't occur to me that this was yeah, it's just what my parents did. Like, when you were little, you thought your father went to work. You never went, "Gee, Dad, why don't you take me to work with you?" Never occurred to me till I was, like, 42. And then I went, "Boy, did I blow it."
Did he pass along any of the things that he learned to you or picked up
Well,
along the
I
way?
mean,
Because
I never really was interested. This is the tragedy of my life. I wasn't that interested in magic. I wanted to be an actress. I was in tap class, ballet class, acting lessons, voice lessons. I wanted to be, Joey Heatherton, I guess,
sure.
at the time, or Anne Margaret, maybe. Now I'm becoming more like Zazu Pitts, I realize, as time goes on. But it matters not. I just wasn't attracted to it. And now I'm so sorry I didn't learn more magic. He really wanted to show me things, and I'd be, not disinterested. That's what you do, Daddy. I
Mhm.
want to learn how to do a triple pirouette and wear tights. I don't know. I don't
But
know why I didn't. But what he did instill in me was some wonderful other things about how to live and how to be a person. My father was a very spiritual person. He talked about ego. He said, "Honey, you know what ego stands for?" And I'd be like, "What, Daddy?" "Edging God out."
Ooh,
And I was like, wow. And I know my dad really believed that. He tried to, make people happy. He was a very kind-hearted person, generous person, helpful person. My mother was a wonderful woman too. She actually has more credits than my father. If you look up my mother,
well,
her name was Seal Cabot,
yeah.
and she did things like, if you go down her IMDb page, everything from Hazel, Hill Street Blues, I Dream of Jeannie, the thing with Angela Lansbury,
Rich,
everything.
So you're a real showbiz family. I
you
mean,
really
Yeah,
are.
they really and they didn't push me at all. They were like, "Study, do whatever you want, sweetheart. If you don't wanna do this." My sister, who didn't go into acting, is very successful in real estate. She was in, advertising, then real estate. She didn't wanna go into show business, and she really could have been fantastic. She sang great and was so beautiful, but wasn't her thing. I'd be like, "Hello there," you know? And she'd be just learning numbers and how to make money, which is
Mm.
fabulous.
What sort of lessons did they impart to you about show business and
Well, my dad always said, "Be unique." He said, "Don't try to copy anybody. Don't try to be like the other guy. Find your own unique way and capitalize on that." And, if you had a bad nose or if you had some weird speech impediment or anything that was uniquely yours, to play that up, but to express yourself.
Yeah.
Express yourself as much as you can, and always to help people. Yeah, I was very conscious of that and being very, very fortunate, and to help people who maybe weren't as
Mm.
fortunate.
In terms of advice, the ego quote alone, everything else after that is
Isn't
gravy.
that great?
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
Isn't it wonderful?
It
Because
really
ego
is.
is such a killer. It's such a, it does kind of destroy a lot of things. And if you can
Mhm.
separate that, you do better.
I
Yeah.
agree. That's a great quote.
So your dad kind of had a legitimate career on stage on top of everything else. And that's something we don't think about a lot, but I mean, he was
I didn't know
like
that.
a Broadway actor.
Really, he had a wonderful career. I have to tell you that my father did not have a big ego, and it was only from other people telling him great things. He remember when he's like 90. My mom died in 2000.
Mm.
My mom was 12 years younger than my dad and was his second wife. So she died in 2000. Oh, I should tell you, both my parents became Christian Scientists. So they did not believe in doctors. They did not go to doctors. They studied Mary Baker Eddy. They had practitioners. Hence, the one joke I ever wrote. What do you call an old Christian Scientist?
I don't know. What do you call an old Christian Scientist?
Lucky.
That's a good joke. Maybe you
Thank
should write
you. My
more.
one joke. If only I had more, I could do an act, but that's it. So my mom, after she died in 2000, I really hung out with my dad a lot because people said to me, Sarah, your dad's not going to last long without your mom. And I'm like, you want to bet? And I started treating him like a golden retriever. I just threw him in the car. I go, come on, Dad, we're going to get a hamburger. We're going to West Hollywood for happy hour. We're going to the castle. I went to the castle every week with my dad. And that's how I really got, after 2000, really got involved with the Magic Castle. It was through him. And then he met other people and had other friends and mentored young magicians and, that kind of thing.
Well, let's talk about the castle. And Jim, I just want to plant this thought in your mind. Imagine you're walking through the castle and walking towards you, probably with a deck of cards in his hands, is Carl Ballantine. Would your heart not just leap out of your chest?
I think I would have just followed him around the rest of the evening and blown off everything else. Yeah, I would just have been in like a pig in slop. I would have been just overjoyed to see him and to watch him and to just be a fly on the wall. He was,
Oh, so
yeah,
sweet. Well, I tell you, it's great to be around the club now. My dad's been gone 15 years, but I still meet people who come up to me there and go, Sarah, I had a great night with your father. We had dinner. He was walking through the club alone. I said, come join us at the table. So I'll hear stories from other people who I would never know in a million years had that, that time with my father. And I love that. It really warms my heart and makes me happy that so many people got to know him and spend time with him. So
Very lucky
that's,
people. So how did
yeah,
you, from
cool.
that, how did you end up on the board?
Well, after my dad died and my mom had died, and I was kind of at sixes and sevens about everything, I had a dear friend, Joan Lawton, who was on the board of trustees at the castle. And she and Irene Larson, who was one of the founders of the club, said, Sarah, we think maybe you should consider running for the board of directors. She was German. And I said, but Irene, I don't know anything about that. And she goes, every member should have the opportunity to be on the board. You learn about the club. It'd be a very good thing for you. And little did I know that I would win. I guess if my name had been Sarah Schwartz, I wouldn't have won. I mean, you do have to be elected. And it is, of course, to some extent, a popularity contest. And therefore, but I think I've more than proved my worth because I've been off and on the board for 12 years and helped, the castle grow and got through COVID and the pandemic and all this. And I'm very proud of it. But that's how I got involved. And then it became a big, big part of my life. I did do my father's act for 1 week at the castle between Christmas and New Year's in 2020 because they needed somebody. And that was really fun for me to do. And
The magician, that's what the sign says, takes the piece of rope and cuts it into 2 pieces. Ha! This is dynamite. Okay, keep your eyes on the 2 pieces of rope. A few passes over the basket with the old dustaroo. And, let's see. Yeah, this is as close as I'm gonna get him.
So I performed there a little bit, but basically I've been just working on keeping the club running and happy and enjoying making decisions that will hopefully keep the club alive for another 60 years.
And I should mention, your dad was an early adopter of the club. Your number is 338, right?
Yeah, how do you know this?
Because I do research. I read things.
Wow, that's pretty
Well, at
good.
least one of us does research.
Yes.
Yeah, he was he had met Bill and Irene at a magic convention. And, I was born in New York. We lived in New York City. But when my dad got McHale's Navy, he came out to California to kind of test the water before Mom and I came out by train because my mother wouldn't fly. And
Mhm.
she was working at a cabaret in New York called the Upstairs at the Downstairs Club, Julius Monk. So she had to give up that job. I had to give up, PS 87. And then we had to come out here, and my dad joined the club immediately.
Yeah.
So
So how has it changed? How has the Magic Castle changed for you
Well,
in that
in
time?
terms of from being a child, from being like I had
Yeah.
my fifth Sweet 16, I think, of the castle. Well, it's gotten very big and very popular, and Magic's bigger than ever. I mean, America's Got Talent in Las Vegas and the whole sort of renaissance of magic. I remember in the 90s, you could, walk through the Castle Club and not see anybody in a certain area. It's very, very popular now.
Yeah.
It's a bucket list destination for people from out of town.
Mhm.
I know people who've lived here their whole life. My dream is to go to the Magic Castle. Oh, you can send me an invitation. Oh, that'd be so wonderful. There's that, and it's gotten very popular. And we have new owners, so the
Mhm.
club will be changing hands somewhat, but they'll still be the Erica Larson, who's daughter of the founder. She's instrumental in this. It's going to be wonderful. It's just, the club just has to keep growing and thriving. It can't be stagnant. Nothing should be stagnant, right?
Yeah.
Even
Right.
Disneyland grows and changes. So it's just getting better and better, I think.
Well, you saw it through a lot of changes, a lot of even turmoil.
Yeah, yeah. And also during the pandemic, and I was on that board, we were very worried. Like people weren't paying dues because they were like, why should I pay dues? I can't come to this club. And we're like, well, if you don't pay your dues, we won't be able to pay the light bill and the heating bill and keep this building going. And we still have to pay our rent and taxes. So, by golly, we did it. We did it.
One more quick thing about the castle before we jump onto a similar topic. There's a link that I'll put in the show notes that I saw years ago of a puppet maker named Scott Land made a marionette of your father and did, as a marionette, did a portion of your father's act. And it's just charming. It
It
is
is adorable.
so charming. How involved was your dad in that?
Well, they were good friends. Scott was also an actor, and we were with the same commercial agent. And I used to run into him all the time. And I thought he was kind of flirting with me, but he really just wanted to get to my father, which is a fine, fine, fine. And so they started to be buddies. And Scott, made these other great marionettes. He had a whole act that was quite wonderful. And yeah, my dad did the voice of the character, whatever the lines are he says.
Mhm.
And he didn't help make the thing at all, but Scott gave him like a mock-up on a stick of the marionette. And then there was an exhibit at the castle for a while with a lot of my dad's memorabilia. And I believe David Copperfield now has that marionette in Vegas at
Mhm.
his museum. Better than it be here. I have enough crap. I have so much stuff. Rubber chickens, you call me.
I
I
can
I
see
can't
one in the
get rid of this.
background there.
No, there's some legs up there.
Yeah,
I can't
yeah.
get rid of these things. There. It's like I know people make fun of me, but I can't help it. I'm not throwing this stuff away. I'm just not.
No.
No.
Oh,
No. Okay, let's just staying still on the topic of your dad, but expanding it a bit. I was so delighted to see your documentary Troupers.
I'm so glad you watched it.
And
I
I
God,
literally wrote to you during it while I was watching it, and I said, I wish this were 10 hours long
the nicest thing. God, thank
because
you.
the people that you captured, and it's people that Jim and I know from our whole lives where in our house, if we're watching something and the name Harold Gould pops up, my wife's like, "Oh my God, Harold Gould's in this. This is fantastic." And Betty Garrett and Pat Carroll and Kay Ballard. I mean, it's just Gene Keane. And then your father. And your father has a really interesting role in the document because it's sort of like he's in it, but he's not. He's sort of a chorus. He's sort of a kibitzer in
He
it.
didn't take it seriously at all. I
He
mean, I'm his
clearly
daughter.
isn't. Yeah. So there, you have these lovely interviews with, I mean, Kay Ballard is fantastic. Pat Carroll talking about doing, going up on her lines in a show. And then there's a shot of your dad kind of just commenting as you guys are walking along the street. Like he didn't want to sit down and do a real thing with you, but he would throw in the occasional Carl Ballantine comment that was actually perfect for it because he's just the right seasoning with these other performers.
And my girlfriend Dea Lawrence, who now works at Variety and is very busy, when we were making and Dea and I used to do a sketch comedy act. We were called the White House Chicks. We were Tipper and Hillary, and we did sketch comedy. And we'd become very, very good friends. So we got this idea, let's make a little documentary film. We were performing all over town. We're exhausted, meetings and this. Let's just do something easy. Let's make like a 10-minute short. And it expanded into a feature. But when we were shooting my dad, he'd be like, aren't you girls getting hungry? Well, we're going out to lunch. Like it was about what we were going to do after. I'd be like, Daddy, we're going to talk for a little bit and then we'll go to lunch. Okay. But, he didn't. He's done other documentaries where he took it much more seriously. This was not, I mean, we learned lighting, we had our white sheets, we rented a camera. I mean, we did the best we could, but he just sort of, I don't know. But I love the way he comes off because it really was very much who he was at the time. I think he was around 88 when we shot him, maybe. I don't know.
Well,
Something.
he's still the consummate performer, even
In that.
in those shots. How long did it take you to do that and to get all those interviews together?
Well, to be honest, we have 16 more hours of interview that didn't make it into the doc. Because, when you make a documentary, or at least the way we did, because we didn't know anything, we're actresses, we've got a camera, we have an idea. That's it. We shot, I thought it was just going to be talking head, talking head, talking head. But that would have been super boring. So we tried to find a through line, like, parental disagreements, the blacklist, show business ageism. We tried to find threads of things like to make the story. And then we ended up getting a really good editor and we'd sit with him and cut to make it more watchable. But I would do it again tomorrow. I would if there were more people that everyone that I really, really would have loved to have talked to has died. And all of my troopers have died, but
Yeah.
I still think the information is what's valuable, and that will be forever. So I'm
The
glad.
stories are great. Gene Keen's story about and the
No,
clip you have of her singing with her
and
sister,
her sister, so
that is
cute.
so funny. Marvin Kaplan's story about Katharine Hepburn as his agent. Is there any one thing you took away from that whole process of those interviews with all of, you had several
Oh,
hundred years of performers there.
definitely. Don't give up. Don't take no for an answer. Now, Jane does say a thing. If something hasn't happened in 5 years, maybe you should look somewhere else. And I almost didn't keep that in, but that's how she felt. Mostly
Mhm.
what you get from everybody is, "No, Kay Ballard is waiting for the phone to ring still." Well, she doesn't
Mhm.
have it now, but,
Mhm.
it's always about the next job. And oh, that was the other thing my dad would say. "I don't wanna talk about the past. I wanna talk about what I'm doing next. I wanna talk about what I'm doing tomorrow." And I think that was what all of them had, was this drive and this desire. Alan Rich, I mean, nothing would
Mhm.
stop that guy. He was
Yeah.
blacklisted, and
Yeah.
"I want that part, pardon my French, but that's what he
No,
said.
that's a great story though,
It's a
standing on
great
the desk
story.
and yelling at him.
I
Yeah.
love that you know it. I love that so much because I mean, Daya and I, we can laugh all the time about this because we had such a blast doing it. We could make another movie, actually, but it wouldn't be as positive. We could take all the sort of negative stories and put together too, but we opted for the story the way we told it.
I think you made the right choice. Jim and I have a thing we've started doing this year on the podcast called I Love That, in which we each surprise each other with something we love that the audience should know about. And I'm not giving anything away when I say when this episode airs. That's going to be my I love that. Is
That's
Amen.
all I want really is for people to watch it. I just feel like the information is great for not just actors. And there have been other documentaries made since then, sort of showing it isn't the showbiz spirit, but it's like people who don't let age or
Mhm.
illness or whatever get in the way of what their dream is, to just keep going, as long as you can. That's really the only secret I can think of, is just to keep going, keep being interested, keep reading, keep paying attention, keep staying active. Try to, it isn't even about making yourself valuable, it's be interested, and then you
Mhm.
become interesting.
There was a book when I was in high school called Date Talk that was circulated amongst our little group of guys.
Can I just
And that
remind everyone that you went to an all-boys school,
all but military school.
so you would
But
need
that
help in this area.
you would, because you have no frame. But that was the premise of the book. If you want to be successful at talking to anybody, it's better to be interested in them than try to get them interested in you. And and when I read that, I was like, oh, well, that makes all the sense in the world. And I've sort of lived by that. And so when she said it, I was like, hey, this takes me all the way back to sophomore year in high school. I grew up on a street named Saratoga. Now she clicked that. And maybe uh, I hesitate to make this a blanket statement, but her father, the quote she gave about her dad and ego
Yeah.
might be the single best life quote from this podcast for me to date. Ego, edging God out. So great. So great.
Well, certainly not difficult to remember. You grabbed onto it right there in the interview. I remembered, we talked to her a while back and we're listening to it now. Your excitement in that. I'm not going to shut down the podcast because you've got the last bit of information you need. We do have to
But
finish
we
this
don't know
book.
it's the last bit of information.
Well, it's
We
the
don't.
best.
There are things you know. There are things you don't know. Then there are things you know you don't know. Then there are things you don't know that you don't know. And right now, there's probably plenty of stuff out there that I could learn yet. But that was a great quote, and one I will use the rest of my life.
Yeah. You probably even get a little pin that says that, put it right in your, it says ego. People say, what does that
Maybe-
mean? And you'd say,
Maybe
well,
a tattoo. Maybe you and I will get podcast tattoos.
I just
Is there
heard-
money in the budget for that?
I don't think there is. I just remember hearing on a podcast someone talking about a meme going around on Facebook of a guy with a tattoo that said "no regrets," and their question was, "Isn't there any sort of chain of command process in doing a tattoo? Isn't there somebody who's proofing Aren't they drawing it ahead of time? You certainly would not do that. Well, maybe you would. I suppose some people would do that as a joke.
Maybe.
No regrets.
I don't know that I would deface my body for a gag.
Oh, probably
I have
not.
to think about that.
Yeah, depends on the gag.
Yeah.
Depends on the reaction you're going to get. Anyway, speaking
Well-
of reactions, I have clips in the show notes of some performances by Carl Ballantine. He had timing. He just had perfect voice, perfect timing.
Part of our sort of childhood, seeing him in absolutely every television show I watched in the 70s.
Yeah.
He showed up
Yep.
and did it. And every time he showed up, I'd chuckle because I liked him so much. And then there's the magic. So
Yeah.
if you haven't seen him do his act, it's in the show notes,
It's
isn't
in the
it?
show notes, as is a link to Scott Land's beautiful marionette puppet of him. The most amazing marionettes where he can actually get the hands to grasp things
Wow.
with the strings. It's pretty amazing. I've also put in a link to a documentary that we talked about, Troupers, that Sarah made.
Yeah,
that
I got to
is-
see that.
You really should sit down and watch it. You know everybody in it. Bruce Kirby shows up, who's the father, Bruno Kirby.
Oh, really?
And Bruce Kirby shows up a lot in Columbo because I'm rewatching all the Columbos, and you do a pretty good Peter Falk impression, but I think you have a similar feeling with your friendship circle that Peter Falk did, which was I'm going to just find a way to get everybody in here and take care of everybody and make sure everybody, in his case, probably also making sure they're getting SAG benefits by putting them in. Bruce Kirby shows up as another detective. He shows up as a store owner. He's in there a lot. There's several actors who show up again and again and again, just because Peter Falk, was that kind of guy.
The great Peter Falk players.
Yes.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that, of finding your people and sticking by them.
Well, speaking of things you love, what do you love this week for I Love That?
Wow. I have kind of a weird one for this week, and it is very specific to me, but there are probably other people out there who suffer from insomnia, which I do, and have for years and years and years. And I have tried, all of the sort of go-to solutions, the Ambien, which flat out works, but there's a weird period there where you are functional, but the next day you have no concept or memory of what you did or said in that, and I didn't like that.
That's where you called in all your friends to help clean up that murder situation.
That's exactly right. Bring a shovel, meet me. I still use CBD, but I found an app called Rise. And when you plug in all of your sort of info to Rise, Rise then does a calculation for you and says, this is when you should go to bed. And so, I have been trying to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, and I will wake up at 12:30, and then I would be awake. And it was troublesome. And Rise said, your bedtime is 12:37. It's that specific.
Wow.
And it will send me, it asks, do you take melatonin or supplements to sleep? Yes, I do. It sends me a text every day in the evening that says, hey, your melatonin window is between this hour and this time and this time, and your bedtime is 12:37. And son of a gun, if I have not had unbroken 8 hours of sleep since I switched my bedtime from 10 o'clock to 12:37. Now, it's not always going to work. I'm not always going to be able to sleep from 12:37 to 8:37. There are days when I have to get up, but then it calculates your sleep debt. So it gives you this piece of information like, hey, you didn't get 8 hours last night. You got 5.5, which means you're short 3.5. So if you can schedule a nap at some point today to catch up, it's going to help you, blah, blah, blah. It's been revolutionary, and really can't recommend it enough if you are, like me, a sufferer from insomnia. I'm now in my first full month of working with this app, and I'm seeing a significant change in not only my sleep patterns, but also my energy patterns during the day. I don't find myself nearly as kind of tired or logy as I was when I was trying to go to bed at 10, thinking, well, I got to get 8 hours and go to bed before midnight is the key to this. Turns out 12:37 was the key to this.
Well, I have a couple questions for you, but first need to point out that this is episode 507, 5 seasons, and I believe that's the first time the word Logie has been used. So congratulations on that. For those of you who are doing the drinking game with Logie, it finally paid off.
And for those of you doing the Eugene Berger drinking game, I just gave you because I know you're thirsty. I just
Yeah.
went ahead.
So how hands-on do you have to be with this app? Do you have to tell it, hey, by the way, I woke up this morning at 6:37?
No, because it's connected to your phone. I read in a Kindle app on my phone, and I'll read on my Kindle app until I realize I'm either holding the phone and my eyes are closed, or I've read that paragraph 3 times. I have no idea what it means, and I should be able to decipher it. Then I know, okay, it's time. And I set the phone down, and now Rise knows, okay, he set his phone down. This is when he's closing his eyes to go to sleep. And when I pick up my phone, then Rise goes, oh, okay, he's awake now. So it is tracking that. If you're uncomfortable with that idea, get comfortable with it. You are being watched and tracked constantly, and that's not conspiracy theory talking. That's just
Right.
reality.
Right. Okay. Well, that's going to lead right into why I love that. So,
All right.
so conveniently that people are going to say we planned this and we did not.
We really didn't.
Mine is an app called Shut Up. And what it does is when you're talking too much, no. I love that.
Completely.
Thank you. It's not a bad idea, actually. The
It
phone
isn't.
listens to you and goes, shut up.
Who do we know that can make us an app?
Shut up. Shut up. No, I love that is a movie from the early 70s by Francis Ford Coppola that he wrote and directed. He did it after Godfather 1, and I believe his deal was, let me do this movie and I'll do Godfather 2. And it's something he'd been working on for many, many years. It's a movie about a guy who's turning 50 years old. That's how he always described it. It's about a man turning 50 years old. It's called The Conversation with Gene Hackman.
Yeah.
And it is about surveillance. It's about being watched.
This is a world of hidden mics and two-way mirrors. A world where nothing is private.
Do you think we can do this?
Later in the week.
Do you think we can do this?
Harry Cole is an expert. The best there is.
Let me tell you something about Harry Cole. The best, bar none. I'll drink to that.
Best what?
The best bugger on the West Coast.
What about me?
He can bug anybody, anytime, anywhere.
Nobody knows how you did it, though, Harry. Caused a hell of a scandal, too.
Look, do you see him? The man with the hearing aid, like Charles. He's been following us all
They're
over.
not people to him, just voices.
3 people were murdered, that's all.
He doesn't know them, and they don't know him.
Had nothing to do with me. I mean, I just turned in the tapes.
Be careful, Harry. You're just supposed to listen. Not look, not feel, not care.
Don't get involved in this, Mr. Cole. Those tapes are dangerous.
Come on, Harry. Show and tell. How do you do it?
Why are you asking me all these questions?
Gene Hackman is Harry Cole in The Conversation. There is nothing private about The Conversation. Listen.
My name is Harry Cole. Can you hear me?
But it's about this seemingly innocuous conversation and the technical end of pulling all the sound together so that he can actually hear it and then turning it over to a very shady employer, guy who's hired him, Robert Duvall, whose assistant is a young actor named, let me see if I can get this right, Harrison Ford.
Holy mackerel.
Plays his assistant. Alan Garfield plays a competitor. It's just a great cast. And it's one of 5 John Cazale movies that he made. And amazingly, every one of them is phenomenal. Anyway, it's a great paranoid movie about surveillance. It's in the 70s, but it works just as well today. Anyway, it's a great performance by Gene Hackman. His girlfriend is played by Terry Garr.
Oh, my Lord.
Anyway, it's a great paranoid thriller along the lines of Parallax View or All the President's Men. Those middle 70s, early 70s movies did a great job of really creeping us out as to what was going on around us. And I think it works just as well today. So it's called The Conversation, and I love that. All right, so that's it for I Love It. Let's move on to why we're really here, in theory, unless if people have tuned out by now.
Oh, I don't think. Maybe. Chapter 7, isn't it?
It is chapter 7. So before I let you read that, you can go flip through the pages and find that. I'll just recap what happened. Eli and Harry and Meghan went and saw the play that Jake North is in. They talk about doing a broken wand ceremony for Oscar. And they see that Jake is on a British talk show that night. And Eli realizes while he watches that Jake has flat out stolen Eli's entire routine. And that takes us right into chapter 7.
Chapter 7. If you ever want to grab the attention of a room full of magicians, the only 4 words you need to utter are, "He stole my routine." I turned back to the TV screen and watched as Jake completed the final phases of my trick, feeling a little woozy as I came to the realization that one of my signature bits was being broadcast throughout Great Britain, and I was not the magician performing it. "That's your routine?" Roy Templeton asked as Jake wrapped up the trick, revealing that, like a well-trained dog, the chosen card had learned to roll over in the middle of the deck. "Well, it is admittedly a pretty standard ambitious card routine, and I'm sure others have done a pack of cards is like a pack of dogs analogy," I said. "But those are my variations, and that's my pattern, almost word for word. The thing is, I never published it or recorded it, so I'm not sure how he..." I let the words trail off as a fuzzy recollection began to form in my brain. While I struggled to retrieve it from the depths of my memory, the other magicians in the room began discussing the implications of my accusation. "Oh, that's low, very low," Roy Templeton said, patting my back paternally. "All it takes is one bad apple," Lawrence Baxter agreed. "Completely extraneous," Angus said in a low growl, and then noticed everyone was now staring at him. He thought back on what he had said and then quickly amended it. "Egregious," he said with a nod of comprehension. "I meant it's completely egregious." "Oh, such a bad thing to do," Hector Hechizo added, shaking his head ruefully. Davis DeVries, who had apparently booked Jake to perform at the unveiling of his Catherine Wheel illusion, was gnawing on a fingernail and looking nearly as white as his hair. While the others continued to commiserate on my behalf, I had a sudden realization. "It was at the reunion," I said, turning to Harry. "Remember when Jake was in town for a high school reunion?" Harry nodded in agreement, and I turned to the rest of the group. "I did that trick at our reunion in front of him. In fact, as I remember it, he was dying after botching Vernon's triumph, and I stepped in and saved his ass with my ambitious dog routine. And now he goes and steals it." I looked back at the TV, which was now onto another show, but that didn't mitigate the anger I felt. "You'll have to take him to task on this, Buster," Harry said. "Take him to task, and I mean pronto. We all know what happens if you let this sort of thing drag on, right?" He turned to his peers, and they all nodded in agreement. "Or it will be Archie Banks all over again," Boris suggested. His comment was greeted with more vigorous nods and grunts of approval. "Who's Archie Banks?" I asked, although there was something vaguely familiar about the name. "He was one of the magi with all of us early on," Harry explained. "A talented man, but sadly, he possessed a tendency toward performance larceny on a grand scale. He was a tosser," Angus added. "Stole with both hands, didn't care from who, a real pyromaniac." "Kleptomaniac," Harry corrected. "Whatever." Angus took another long sip, clearly disgusted we'd raised the memory of Archie Banks. "He stole my book test word for word, and that was the jewel of my act," Boris said, starting to fume at the memory. "He copied 3 of my best big box illusions. Really smart stuff," DeVries added, a little relieved, I think, the subject had veered away from Jake North. "Not only copied them for his act, but then he had the temerity to sell knockoff copies as well. And then, to add insult to injury, he accused me of stealing the ideas from him." The SOB even snuck in and nicked my best ad-libs. Choice stuff, Roy said as Baxter refilled his glass. Well, with any luck, Eli's current situation can be resolved with less acrimony, Baxter said as he continued around the room refilling glasses. And certainly, less bloodshed. That got my attention. Bloodshed? I said, looking from Baxter to Harry for some clarification. The two men exchanged looks and reached a soundless decision as to who would provide the explanation. Sadly, Harry said, Archie Banks died. A failed suicide attempt. That phrasing struck me as odd. A failed suicide attempt? I repeated slowly. But wouldn't that mean he survived? Only if his goal was to kill himself, Harry said. Are there other goals in a suicide of which I'm unaware? I asked, feeling like we were headed into some sort of morbid who's on first routine. The feeling at the time was Archie was only attempting suicide with the goal of being prevented before the act was completed, Baxter explained. God knows he had tried it before, always pulling out at the last second, Harry mused. I remember he called me once, middle of the bleeding night, said he'd taken a handful of pills, Angus said, shaking his head at the memory. He was going to jump off a bridge, he was going to shoot himself, he was thinking of hanging himself, Roy continued, ticking off each method with his fingers. Got so annoying, I was ready to do the deed myself. This brought the group up short. Realizing the implications of what he had just said, Roy laughed it off. But you know me, my follow-through is rubbish. Unfortunately, in this one instance, Archie was not stopped and was, therefore, successful in his suicide, Harry added, but unsuccessful in his suicide attempt. A failed suicide attempt, I repeated quietly, right on the edge of understanding. How did he do it? What method? Gas, Harry said. He had expected his girlfriend to come home and discover him in time, and as luck or fate would have it, she didn't. Instead, she found Archie with his head in the oven and a suicide note on the kitchen table. Yikes, I said. Yikes, indeed, Lawrence Baxter agreed, taking a slow sip from his drink. That poor woman, Harry said quietly. I didn't even know he was dating anyone, DeVries added. Very private type, Archie Banks. Secrets within secrets, that sort of thing. I never met her, but he claimed she was quite a looker, Angus confided to me quietly. He said she hailed from Australia, down under. Met her on a cruise gig or some such thing. But if you ask me, I think it was just a cover. I looked over at him, not fully understanding his words. Wouldn't have been surprised, he said, his voice getting even lower, if Archie worked both sides of the street, if you get my meaning. This was followed by a very deliberate wink. He blamed us all, Roy Templeton said loudly, pulling me back into the main conversation. Roy switched off the television. He steals from us, and it's our fault he gets kicked out of the magic circle? Preposterous, DeVries said, and I wouldn't have been surprised if he had added an indignant harumph to the end of his statement. I'm not saying his feelings were reasonable, Roy replied, but he was essentially blackballed by the industry and couldn't work. A man like that without honor, he does not deserve to be a magician, Boris said, setting his teacup down. We sat silently for several minutes. Some of us were doubtless considering the sad fate of Archie Banks. However, nothing that profound was occupying my mind. I was thinking about inventive and painful ways to kill Jake North. The old guys were long-time drinkers, professionals, really, far more skilled than me, so I don't think any of them were surprised when I excused myself early, begging off for some much-needed sleep. We'll figure out a plan of action in the morning, don't you worry, Harry said as I got up to leave. Jake won't get away with this. This statement was greeted with echoes of agreement throughout the room, and I was pleased this kerfuffle with Jake, annoying as it was, appeared to have taken my uncle's mind off his current standing as suspect number 1 with Scotland Yard. While I appreciated his concern, my issue with Jake was small potatoes compared to a potential murder charge. I vowed that the next day, in addition to tracking down Jake and telling him off in the strongest possible terms, I would make some progress on clearing Harry of any and all charges. As I made my way through the massive house toward the sleeping quarters, I was reminded of Harry's earlier comment to our host about the need to leave a trail of breadcrumbs to find your way back to your room. The layout wasn't all that Byzantine, but it was dark, the path was a bit twisty, and I had consumed enough port to be feeling its effects on my already jet-lagged motor skills. This was, of course, really no excuse, but it did help explain why I yelped like a frightened dog when I rounded a corner and found myself face to face with the daunting Miss Hess. "Looking for your room?" A simple enough phrase, but it came out of her mouth with such a wave of menace, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Not only stand up, but start to pack their bags and update their passports. No, I know where it is, just headed there now, I added as I sidestepped around her. "Thanks, have a good night. See you in the morning," I added for some inane reason. "Be careful in the dark," she said as she turned the corner. "We wouldn't want any accidents, would we now?" I was surprised Megan wasn't in our room when I finally found it, but she showed up minutes later as I was beginning to get dressed for bed. I recognized instantly she had consumed much more alcohol than I had. "Did you have any idea how much Roxanne hates Lawrence Baxter?" were the first words out of her mouth. I jumped up from the task of removing my shoes and rushed to shut the heavy door behind her before she could head any further down that particular train of thought. She loathes him," Megan went on, not adjusting her volume despite my obvious steps to minimize just how far her voice might carry. "I've suspected as much," I replied quietly, hoping she might get the hint and modulate her volume. "She jokes about it, but there's always a bit of bite behind those jokes. There are a number of the Magi who she doesn't seem to care for, but she saved the strongest vitriol for poor Baxter." "Tell me about it," Megan said, sitting on the bed a little harder than she had anticipated. "What did he ever do to her?" "I think it has more to do with what he may or may not have done to her husband," I said, again demonstrating a volume level I was hoping she would imitate. Early in their careers, they were both up for some of the same gigs, and Lawrence always seemed to be the one to get them. I sat down in a nearby chair and continued the process of removing my shoes. "Which happens all the time with magicians," I said. There are only so many jobs to go around." "However," I continued, struggling with an obstinate shoelace knot that refused to come undone, "Roy Templeton and Lawrence Baxter's acts are so radically different, I find it hard to believe they were ever really going head-to-head. But there is no denying Baxter's level of success has clearly eclipsed Roy's, and everyone else's for that matter. I achieved victory with the knot on the left shoe, and it looked like the right shoe wasn't going to be nearly as difficult. Until it was. I think it's true of all the Magi, because they were all coming up around the same time," I said, tugging at the lace, which only made things worse. "They were all young and hungry and jostling for the same opportunities. Some people did better than others. Resentments were formed, jealousies developed, and a few of them have held on to their bitterness longer than others." The last of the troublesome knots finally unfurled, and I pulled off both shoes, feeling like I had won a contest of some kind. "Of course," I went on, "Harry has always said if he had lost all the jobs he got in his career and had gotten all the jobs he lost, he would basically have had the same career. I guess things just work out the way they work out." Sadly, Megan missed these last meaty morsels of wisdom. When I looked up from my completed task, she was sleeping soundly on the bed, blissfully uncaring that both her shoes were still firmly on her feet. I removed her shoes with envious ease and then repositioned her on the bed so her head was at least in the vicinity of her pillow. Then I covered her with a blanket, got into my pajamas, and fell asleep moments later. I woke up once in the middle of the night, and the house was dead quiet. I wouldn't realize until morning what an apt description that turned out to be.
Miss Hess is turning into something of a villain in this book, and she's clearly based on Miss Danvers. I don't know if you've seen the movie version of Rebecca, but Judith Anderson.
Don't know that I have.
Well, you've seen
Yes.
variations on her, because that's what Cloris Leachman is doing in Young Frankenstein.
Exactly.
With a German accent. But Judith Anderson really created that archetype, which...
Oh, you know what? I did see it, John, because I did a show at the Milwaukee Rep called The Mystery of Irma Vep.
Mm-hmm.
And the female, it's a 2-person show, but the audience thinks they're seeing 4 actors until about halfway through the first act when they realize, hang on a minute, these guys are just changing costumes incredibly quickly and coming back from man to woman. And the governess of the house was based on that character. So we did watch Rebecca.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a funny character, and turns up, it's amazing the number of times that people have just done variations on that. The one other thing I thought of while listening to you read this thing was this concept of stealing, which pops up from time to time in the magic world. You know, there's people revealing things, but there's also people just flat out stealing things. Some people are litigious about it. I know Teller famously won a lawsuit against someone who stole one of his routines. Our friend Nick DeFott has had people steal things of his. But for you as an actor, that's not really ever an issue, is it?
Well, I will say that the reason I got to do and work with Eugene Berger, now there's your legitimate Eugene Berger reference, was because I approached him asking for permission to do his show and wondered who had the rights at that point. Rights are something that, as actors, we pay a little attention to. Who's got the rights to that? Who do I need to pay money to? And so Eugene worked with me largely because I asked. And in further conversations, he said, that's the reason I agreed to work with you, because most in the magic fraternity, if you can figure out how somebody did something, you can go ahead, the people just go ahead and steal it. And you know, I think Laurence Olivier's advice to actors was watch everything, steal everything, and then filter it through you. And I do a lot of that. I really do. I do. There are actors that I see and go, okay, I got to remember that and find a place for it somewhere. And often I can, and often I do. But but it's not like stealing somebody's act. I guess the closest thing, if an audience is going, well, what's the big deal? Imagine somebody just getting up and doing Robin Williams' act, line for line.
Well, it might not be the best choice because he was accused of getting up and doing other
He was the first
people's.
guy I came up with. Nate Bargatze, who I think is a phenomenal comic right now.
Yeah.
If you just stood up and started doing his jokes,
Yeah.
You might get laughs with it, but at some point, somebody's going to say, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
And so in the magic fraternity, I'd like to think that this isn't as prevalent as it maybe once was, now that magic is experiencing what I call its renaissance, that people are not doing it as much, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I hope that you're right. I think social media also helps call things out much more quickly.
Right.
But we will be coming back to this theme again and again throughout the Linking Rings, because it is about the stealing of magic. So more on that later. That's it for 507. Next time, we're going to listen to Chapter 8, and then we're going to re-listen to some thoughts from Michael Close about how he coaches magicians for Penn & Teller's Fool Us, how it helped them adapt their acts for television, which is a place where misdirection doesn't work, how to work with camera angles, different techniques to make that work. So that's next time. I'll also pre-recommend, Michael has a great podcast called Conversations with Clothes. So if you want to add another podcast to your list, he puts them out infrequently, but they are solid conversations. Definitely worth looking up. Until then, hang in there.
Yeah. Be good, everybody. Be kind to each other.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at elimarksmysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.